It's so good to have you, Scott, on the show. How are you today?
I am awesome. How are you?
I'm doing pretty good. Well, I'm super excited to have you here. For anyone who doesn't know, I'm a This Naked Mind certified coach, and Scott's like number two of the organization, working along with Annie Grace. We had Annie on the show about a year ago, so I'm just super excited to get you on and kind of learn a little bit about your backstory.
I'm happy to be here, but I do need to correct. I am not number two, but I'm up there. We'll put it that way. How about that?
It feels like that, definitely from public appearance. So tell us a little bit about what your role is there, what you see yourself doing, how you help people. Just share a little bit for anyone who doesn't know who you are, what your thing is.
Sure. Yeah. So I'm really passionate about helping people kind of get over, get around, get through their struggles with alcohol. And so what I do at This Naked Mind is I'm the head coach. So I'll present things with Annie. I'm also involved with the coaches like you in our programs in making sure that those kind of keep running effectively. My main passion, though, is really trying to get people to a place where they're not just like, I quit drinking, but they're like building a life that, well, as we say, a life they don't want to escape from.
I like that so much. And I mean, what an incredible mover and shaker on the field to really disrupt the way we were talking about alcohol before. Annie's Grace book is just so pivotal in that.
Yeah.
And I'd love to know a little bit about like what your backstory is to one, be passionate about this message, and even how you got started as a coach. But even before that, like what the drinking story was, and how you kind of found freedom.
Sure. So it's interesting. I didn't start drinking until college, actually, and was kind of afraid of it. My dad, had a problem, and he was pretty open about it, and was in and out of AA, and I don't know, it scared me. But then I got to college, and it didn't scare me anymore. And what started happening, I started drinking right at freshman year, and I kept drinking all the way through senior year. And I remember there was one day in particular, something bad happened in my life. I got dumped. And I remember my best friend saying, "Don't worry about it, Scotty. We're going to drink every day until graduation." This was in March too, by the way. So it was like months away. And that's the first time that I really remember thinking, yeah, like I can lean on this, like this is going to help. And that very quickly sent me down a road where I was drinking more and more and more and more as time went on. So after college, I continued drinking, and I drank for a little over 15 years total. And I would say the last 5 or 6 years of that, I was actively trying to quit. But I tried all the things that we're told to try, right? I tried AA. That did not speak to me. I tried lots of other, I tried therapy and books, and I just felt really, really trapped. But then I actually found the book, This Naked Mind. This wasn't so long after it was published. And this approach, as you were saying, and Annie's whole idea behind everything was completely radical and revolutionary for me. And so I loved it. Like I inhaled the book. I actually read it too fast. I had to read it quickly the first time, and then had to go through and take my time the next time. But that just totally shifted my thinking. And it shifted my thinking so much that I wanted to tell other people. Um, so I was involved with an online sort of self-improvement group, and word got around that I quit drinking. And so first it was, hey, do you want to host a book club? And then, people were reaching out to me one-on-one. And then someone said, hey, you should like do this like for a living. At the time I was an engineer. And I just found that I really had a passion for it. And it was really a couple of things, I think, at first. One was, and This Naked Mind is much more well known now, but at the time I was like, everybody needs to know about this, because it's just so counter to the sort of what's the word, the cultural beliefs that we have about it. Like I felt like, because I knew I wasn't the only one who was stuck. I just wanted to shout it from the rooftops. And then I found that I really, really enjoyed coaching. And I did that for a while before I met Annie. But that's kind of the backstory for me.
Yeah. Oh, I love that so much. And I think it's really typical, obviously, for people who want to change their relationship with alcohol, where they notice a time where they really start marinating on it. They're really thinking
Mhm.
about it. They're trying new things, whether it's the moderation game or maybe trying to take a break or stop. And
Yeah.
it's really something that's in their mind. And now as you have so much distance from it and, just so much openness with the research and just what is effective and what really works, can you look back at like those 5 years where you were trying so hard and you were stuck? And can you kind of distill a little bit about what wasn't working? Like what was wrong with all of those other approaches or just the mindset? Like what
Yeah.
did you feel like? Why did it never click?
I would say two biggies. And I'll go with the least biggie of them first. So the first thing was trying to quit with willpower. So I was at this position, and I think a lot of people will be familiar with this, where I knew this was going in one direction. Like I wasn't drinking less and less as time went on, and I could see the effects. I could see the effects on my family and my work and my finance. I mean, just everything. It was very, very obvious. Um, and so at the same time, I also wasn't sure I wanted to quit drinking. Right. So it's like I saw all this bad stuff, but then it's like, yeah, but what about stress? What about this? And so I held on to that mindset for a long time. And I actually went into this process in the way that a lot of people do by trying not to do something I want to do. And that was hard, and it's funny. I see people in our programs now that can get days or weeks with willpower, or they'll tell me when they join, like, yeah, I spent weeks just kind of white knuckling it. I could not get more than a day. Like, and so that was thing number one, was just using that willpower, trying to force the change. And thing number two, which is seriously the biggest thing, and I think the thing that really spun my head around when I read This Naked Mind, was that I used to beat the hell out of myself. I really thought that the way for me to get where I wanted to go needed to be shame and blame and guilt and anger. And I really, and these two things, willpower and this sort of lack of self-compassion tie together, because as time went on, I thought what I had to do is crank up the shame and blame. Like I haven't been pushing myself hard enough. I haven't been beating myself enough. I haven't been down on myself enough that if I just did that, I would shift. So it's really those two things that I look back on. And that was the majority of that time. The time I read Annie's book, This Naked Mind, I read it over a weekend. I was really excited, wasn't quite ready to quit drinking. A couple of months later, I actually took 2 months and went through the book, and that was it. So it was really, 5-ish months at the end there. And the rest of that 6 years was just beating on myself.
Yeah, it's so interesting how you share that, because if you were to just share the story like, oh, I read the book, I read it twice, and then
Yeah.
poof, everything's solved. Like it looks like such a like rapid transformation. And I do believe that things just finally click for someone, right? Like they really do. And it's just like I'm in this sustainable territory where I just have lost my desire, or I'm losing my desire over a period of time. But it's so
Yes.
interesting, like we never see the iceberg underneath the water, right? Like the
Totally.
years.
Totally. And I feel like quitting drinking for many people, this isn't necessarily true for everyone, but for many people, I feel like quitting drinking is not the end of the journey. Like for me, there were so many, the reason I was in this online self-improvement group was that I don't want to say I wasn't happy with my life. Like I love my wife, I love my kids, but like I felt like there was so much more for me. And I did, some sort of simpler changes, and I realized like, oh, this alcohol thing standing in my way. And then when I dealt with that, well, then I was off to the races with everything else, And so this journey, the one of the reasons I'm so passionate about this is I meet people all the time, every day, who have so many things that they want to change or improve or shift about their life. And they feel like, man, this alcohol thing is standing in the way.
I know I felt like that so much. It's just like the big pause that you press, and it's that big incongruency that's standing
Yeah.
in the way. I'm
Mhm.
curious, you mentioned earlier how during those years of trying to figure this out, like there was obviously the desire to not drink, but then still very much married to the desire to drink.
Yes.
Did you ever feel like the fear of becoming your father kind of stopped you? Like just like I don't want to ever we have the stereotype of someone who cannot drink, and it's so sad, and we have to tiptoe around them for the rest of our lives. And I'm not saying that was how your father was at all, but just, was there ever a fear of like, I'm not going to become that, so I need to get this under control?
This is getting deep. I had no idea. So first of all, I mean, for the record, my dad's awesome. And interestingly, for him, I think it was 2003 was his last drink. So we're almost at 20 years now. But to be honest, yes, I was really worried about that. I had a picture in my head of what it meant to quit drinking, right? So both like what life was like, but also just how people relate to you. Because I saw a shift in my own relationship with my dad when he quit. Like I knew he was struggling off and on, but maybe I wasn't as tuned into it. But like I remember, thinking about like, oh, I can't have a beer with my dad. And it shifted the way I saw things. And, the term alcoholic is what he used. And it was the term I used. And yeah, I didn't want to turn into that. I had all of these ideas of what it would be like if I quit, and they were all deprivation based. I also think seeing my dad's struggles, the conclusion I was drawing from that was that it must suck to be alcohol free. And he's very happy now. He's made some shifts, but like at the time, yes, I was afraid of that. And I was afraid of the label, and I was afraid of living what I thought would turn out to be a really boring life.
Yeah. I mean, I don't have the direct experience like with my father or my mother, but that was the biggest fear. It's the only thing I ever heard about, this life of deprivation. And, the little stints I had put together of not drinking, 5 days here, 7 days here, like they did feel like that. Right. So I just thought like, well, then it's just eternity of this, which is not true whatsoever at all.
Yeah.
You mentioned too, like how it's just like the first step or one of like a personal growth experience where you recognize alcohol is like the big domino that's not allowing me to have all these other things I want.
Yeah.
And so as you have this big epiphany and you really shift your thinking about it, once you read the book, you're starting to get called upon as a leader, as someone who kind of transforms not just from the student, but to the teacher, being asked to lead a book group and then to, start coaching. How did that feel once you were kind of looking out for what was next in your life? Did you know it was going to be coaching, or were you just kind of like following little clues as you went along to see what made you feel fulfilled?
I don't want to say I knew it was going to be coaching. What happened, from this time of drinking, over 15 years, I was making increasingly poorer decisions. And, I had a job, it paid well. I don't want to criticize that, but I can't say I was happy, and I spent a lot of time, I had an engineering degree, and I spent a lot of time, and I look back over the 15 years that I was an engineer, and I saw myself jumping around from job, like, oh, maybe I'll like this, maybe I'll like that. What about this company? What about that company? It was always this like constantly on the search for the next thing. Like I just haven't found my space yet. And I remember when I first started coaching, when I first like made a website and I got like my first paying client, I remember having the thought of like, oh, like this is what it feels like to be, I don't know, to be like so invested in this process and these ideas. And this is what it feels like to go do this work that I really, really love. It's not that I didn't like engineering. It just wasn't super interesting to me all the time. And I knew engineers who were like that. Like I had my old boss, I love the guy to death. He was such a nerd though. Like he loved every piece of it, like the springs underneath the equipment and the size of the fan. And like, to me, I'm like, blah, blah, blah. These are details, but to him, he would spend so much time. And I never felt that passion with engineering. And suddenly when this kind of opportunity started developing, I started to feel that passion. And, to kind of get back to your question, I just followed it. It was happening. And at first it happened very much organically. I helped one person, and then, he told someone else, and then I'd get another phone call. And that's just kind of how it all started. And it just felt so good to be there. And for me, coaching has never been about getting someone from some place to another. It's always been, and this goes back to This Naked Mind, the book, it's always been about helping someone see a new aspect, a new perspective that helps them feel better. And I mean, who doesn't want to do that? Like that, it was that all the time for me. So it was kind of a windy road. And I'm glad I followed it, and there were risks along the way, and, spending money and figuring things out. And I mean, I was also working 50 hours a week. So I had to do nights and weekends, and I live in New England. So I would get up at 6 a.m. and have clients in London. Like, I was able to do a lot of things. But it was all coming from a place of passion that I had never really felt before.
Yeah. I remember those early morning calls with European clients before I left my day job.
Yes. Yeah.
Something that's so cool, I think, about just like, helping one person and then having another come to you and just slowly building this, is that like you didn't wait to be perfect or like some kind of accomplishment bow being put on you until you started helping people. And obviously, I totally believe like if you're going to coach, a certification is really important, but it's also not necessarily the first thing you have to do in order to get started. Like you can start blogging, you can start sharing advice on the internet, you can start helping friends and family. There's all these things. So did you ever get stuck in that, like, okay, I don't have a PhD. I remember thinking, Scott, I don't have a PhD in this. How could I possibly help people?
No, I didn't. There were times, I mean, so I didn't get stuck in that, but I was also always very clear with people. I mean, when this was a side gig for me, I said, hey, this was a side gig. I had this experience. I've helped a few people. I'm happy to help you. Here's what it costs, essentially. But I'm very clear. I was always very clear that I didn't have that hang up. I think for me, the thing that pushed me so much was the passion for it. I love talking, and it was so different. It was so different than my day job that, as long as, and that was a big thing for me, I was always very upfront about like, I don't have this certification. I don't have this thing. I'm still happy to talk to you. And I think also, especially because I did a lot of those engagements for free early on, my confidence kind of grew through that. And that really helped me, take those steps forward. But no, and I remember I was looking at different certifications and I was thinking about it. And then things kind of took a turn when I met Annie and I had the opportunity to coach with This Naked Mind.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think what's really cool is that a lot of people also think that if you want to get involved in this movement, like, you have to birth your own business, you have to become the, CEO of your own thing. And a lot of people, maybe aren't looking for that much either responsibility or that much on their shoulder or that much to do alone, but do want to somehow get involved and have a career that they're so much more passionate about. So to however much comfortability you have to share this, can you share a little bit about like, how did you meet Annie? How did you get involved in This Naked Mind? And how did you build up such a like incredible position there?
Sure. So I will happily share, and actually users can go listen to the This Naked Mind podcast. I think I'm like episode 24. That is a recording of the first time Annie and I ever met. Like I did not know her prior to that. Where I was at a place where my coaching business was doing really well. There was quite a gap between my engineering job income and what I was generating with my coaching business. But I'm like, I want to do this. So I had really at that point made the decision of like, all right, I really want to ramp this thing up. And I was just, in the early throes of trying to figure out how to do that. I didn't have all the things we teach in TNMI, like a lot of those things I had to figure out, and look around for different resources and all that. Not long after I made that decision, Annie sent out an email saying, who wants to be on my podcast? And I'm like, oh my God, me, like, yes, please. And so I signed up, and like I said, I think it's I never remember the number. It's very early. And, we just really kind of hit it off, and I think Annie was a little bit like, wait, you're building a business based on this book? And I'm like, hell yes, I am. It's amazing. And we just sort of stayed in touch. And so what happened over time is, as This Naked Mind was growing, Annie was launching new programs. So one of the first coached programs we had was something called the Intensive. And she reached out to me and asked me like, hey, would you like to coach in here? And so, I was on there with a few other people. And I started coaching in intensives, and then that just kind of picked up steam after a while. I went from there. I was still with my engineering job to like taking on the title of head coach and kind of doing both things at once. All the while my one-on-one coaching clients were growing, so I was like getting closer and closer to this thing. And then there was suddenly an opportunity. I'll never forget this. I was on a site visit. I had just crawled around an apartment building in Euclid, Ohio. And I was talking to Annie later in that day, and there was an opportunity to come on full time. And I jumped on it, and that was that. And that would be 4 years ago, this upcoming August. So yeah, it's been an interesting ride.
Wow. Well, congratulations on that. I know 4 years is a lot to celebrate, and just how much you've been able to accomplish in that time, and just the work you guys have done together is just so cool. And I think what's interesting about the way you describe the story is that, like, obviously, like in any definition, like This Naked Mind is a startup, right? And it wasn't just like they had a job board with like, here's a full-time position with a salary and
Yeah.
401k. Like you had to kind of work your way into that.
And I've done a lot of different things there, as have, a lot of us that were there from the start. That's been one thing that's really tremendous about working with Annie is like, and she's a CEO, and this permeates the whole company. So it's not just her, but like, it's very growth focused, and growth oriented. So I remember like in very, very early days, like sometimes I would write an email sequence, and then I'd jump on a coaching call, and then I'd deal with this and I deal with that. And like, as we've grown, the team's grown, and it's required that I have grown, and that Annie has, and everyone else on the team. And so it's been very interesting to be involved in this from those sort of early startup days a few years ago to where we are now. And I think we have over 20 people on our team now. And we're just getting started. Like, we're just continuing to grow. It seems that the pace seems to be picking up, which is exciting.
Yeah. Do you find that you usually look into the community of people who have changed their lives through This Naked Mind for like new people, new talent, or is it kind of spreading out further than that now?
We do, we do. So I don't do the hiring side of it, but we do post, in our groups when we have open, open positions. And I've seen a lot of people have come to us that way. But we also post on job boards as well. But I mean, we get so many emails from people who just want to volunteer and like help in some sort of way. And a lot of times that's a fantastic source for us to say, hey, we have this position open, who's interested? And, it ranges, a lot of like customer service stuff or social media stuff. We find a lot of those people in our inboxes.
Yeah. Yeah. That's so cool. I found the same thing kind of happening to my business as it's grown. Like my first assistant, like DM'd me the first time, like, hey, do you need help? And I'm getting more, volunteers and people asking to help here too. So it's just interesting how things unfold like that. So switching gears a little bit, and we have a lot of listeners in this show who've kind of done this transformation. And, what we're talking about earlier, it not only brings you so much, I think, fulfillment to be able to like take these hard-won challenges, these perceptions, these insights that you've really cultivated for yourself, and then help someone else see something differently, but also the contribution you're making. Not only do you feel like your work matters, like, it does, because you're seeing the ripple effect,
Yes.
So it almost becomes not about you at the end of the day. So I just feel like so many people are looking for that. They're so hungry for something that gives them a sense of fulfillment, of giving back, of owning their own thing, maybe of having autonomy, of not having a boss. I mean, you name it, there's so many things. So tell us a little bit about this Naked Mind Institute for anyone who's interested in becoming an alcohol-free life coach themselves.
Yeah, so we started the Institute back in 2019. And, I'd mentioned earlier that I was coaching in the intensive, and we were seeing, there was demand for this, and suddenly we're like, wait a minute, there might be demand for more coaches. We got to figure this out. And actually, it wasn't very long, and I can't remember who it was, but not long after Annie wrote and published the book, someone reached out to her saying, hey, do you have a coaching course? And that was the first of many requests we got over time of people saying, hey, we want to be certified in this. And so when we were putting the whole thing together, we were spending some time, doing a lot of interviews and connecting with the people who wrote in to find out first what they wanted, and second, what they wanted, but they didn't know they wanted. And so we spent a lot of time in talking with people who were interested, and these were people from all different sort of walks of life. Like some people who were existing coaches and wanted to do it. We had a lot of therapists reach out to us. We also had a lot of people who were very much like me, right? Like, I have a day job, but screw that, I want to do this. Like, how do I do it? And so ultimately we ended up putting together a program that was really designed to teach people how to have their own coaching business. So we combined the coaching methodology work with the marketing background. And by no means do we want to be like a one-stop shop for anyone, but we can teach the basics. And then we also combine that with mindset, being a business owner, to kind of create this package that is for people who are new to this and want to get started. That's how we developed it. And so we've been running it now for a few years, and we're constantly tweaking and updating. But our goal is to train people in the methodology and these ideas. And then, like you said, alcohol-free life coach, I think is what you said. And the way that we've really set this up is we've set it up to be a life coaching school with an alcohol track. We do have some other things coming out, which I don't want to talk about too much because I don't know what's actually public. Eventually, though, we hope to have other tracks. But we set it up that way also because, yes, you're right. There are a lot of people who go through this journey and get to the space where they say, I want to keep growing. I want to keep changing. So we really wanted to equip our coaches with tools that they could use to keep coaching, right? To keep growing with people. And so we have coaches now who've been active for 3 years, and their businesses are growing and flourishing. And we also want them to do more than just coach. I mean, if coaching is what you want to do, that's great. But we have coaches like you who have written books. We have coaches who have, branched out into other areas where they're not even coaching alcohol anymore. That's really what we're trying to do, is give people the tools to get started, but not pen them in to like, this is only coaching. Our goal at the end of the day, if you were to ask Annie, like, what is this Naked Mind trying to do? She would tell you that we're trying to change the conversation about alcohol, right? We want to make it a wellness conversation instead of an addiction conversation. And the only way we're going to do that is if we have a bunch of different coaches doing a bunch of different things, all talking about this message in their own way. And so we've designed the Institute to promote that.
Yeah. Oh, I love hearing you share it like that, because I think just, reading into it at the very start when I was looking is like, okay, am I working to them? Am I contracted with them? Is there like some kind of binding thing, right? Yeah. And you really do have that. And I love, hearing from Annie and yourself about it. Like, you give so many wings to people to go out and go do whatever they want to do with it. But at the same time, it's like this method that just works so well. And personally, I got a certification in life coaching first, a generic one. And I knew I always wanted to go back and get something more specific to alcohol, but I was looking around and I was like, I'm not doing these recovery programs. Like, I don't believe in them. I don't believe that method works. So I just was kind of waiting until, you guys popped up magically on the scene. And I was like, hell yes, I believe in this. I know this works. This is what I want to be certified in.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's funny, to your first point. Yeah, a lot of people wonder, like, all right, so once I complete this training, I'm gonna work for this Naked Mind. And I'm like, I always have to say, no. Like, our vision is so much bigger than that. I mean, if that's what we wanted to do, right? So like, our flagship program is called The Path. I could just train coaches for The Path and that could be it. I think our programs are fantastic, but I also know only so many people are going to jive with Annie or with me. So like, we know that we need other people, other voices out there. So it's always interesting when people are like, oh, so yeah, when I'm done, I work for you, right? I'm like, no, that's not how this works. How this works is when you're done, you call yourself a This Naked Mind coach and you go do your thing. And we set it up purposefully in a way where there's a fee for training, and then that's it. Like there's ongoing like yearly things. And if you want to join us in our sort of coaches program, you can, but like our goal is that you can get this training. And then if you find that it isn't, you're not coaching that much, or you do just want to go write books or whatever that might be, right? We want to really create a situation where we have our arms around everybody who wants to get certified and stay certified, but we also want to set it up so that if you go through the certification and then you're like, you know what, this was awesome, but I want to go in this direction now, which we have had people do, that's totally cool. Again, at the end of the day, for us, it's about spreading the message, right? And shifting that conversation.
Yeah. You said that conversation is to shift it around being, a topic about wellness versus addiction. And I've always fundamentally believed that, as soon as I started learning more about alcohol, I was like, there's literally nothing healthier you could do, not just from the physical body perspective, but for the mind, for the soul, than not drink or drink as infrequently as humanly possible. Right.
Yes.
And so it really almost grinds my gears still when it really is positioned as, an addiction conversation. And I'm curious that, you guys have grown so much, you're in the limelight. Mm-hmm. Have you gotten a lot of flack from the traditional kind of recovery addiction specialization over the message that you're trying to change?
We do from time to time. I think I wasn't around in the really early days of the book when it was first published, but Annie's told me stories about, there were some letters, there were some comments, because a lot of what we're saying is counter to what many people and some of the biggest recovery programs believe in. And so, people, and I think they're well-meaning, well-intentioned people, reached out with maybe not the most nice sort of messages, because they were concerned. But what has happened over time is we've sort of proven ourselves, right? So people are seeing like, oh, these programs are working, that people are actually shifting, and they're saying, oh, wait a minute, like, not only that, but the people coming out of these programs are really happy. So I think that over time we've proven ourselves. And yes, from time to time we hear from people who think what we're doing doesn't work, but the proof is in the pudding. I mean, the number of people that come out of our programs and the reviews we have, it really points to the fact that yes, this is possible. And our whole idea to this, and people will ask me all the time, like, oh, can I join your program and still go to AA? I always say yes, right? As far as I'm concerned, whatever it takes for you, whatever is comfortable for you, what actually helps you get over this mountain is all good, right? And so a lot of people, there are people like in the path, there are a few people I know of that will occasionally go to meetings. The vast majority of them don't, but what we really want to encourage is people to blaze their own trail, right? To say, oh, I like this thing, I like this thing, I like this thing. Because if you're enjoying what you're doing, it means you're going to do it more, which means you're going to get there faster. So yeah, I mean, ultimately, I think there are in some places, some disagreements, but the vast majority of people we interact with is positive. And even those we disagree with, it's not, it's not like a turf war or anything.
Yeah. It's crazy how much things have changed. I mean, I started really kind of speaking up about this only in 2018. And even then I remember how many just random comments or haters or, just negative kind of things I would get around it, like not using the word alcoholic or, you really using the AA or 12-step kind of methodology. And nowadays I just don't even, I'm so just in this alcohol-free space, just so much of that choice, that freedom, that I don't even think people assume that AA is like the way anymore. I could be wrong. Like, I don't know what the mass majority think anymore, but I almost feel like that's not really the assumption anymore. I'm not sure. But I just want to share this one story. I remember around that time, I was introduced to like a lunch and learn that was being hosted by a group of recovery professionals. So it was licensed counselors and some psychotherapists and psychologists. And it was basically they were there to hear from a researcher who did really extensive, peer driven research on efficacy efficiency, whatever that word is, efficacy in programs. And they were saying that like the more labels they use, the more they'll use the words alcoholic or relapse, the worse and damaging it is for people's self-worth, and then unsustainable for their sobriety over a long time. This researcher had PhDs, he'd been studying for this, he had so many studies, and the room wouldn't buy it. The room was like, no, if we stop calling it that, then they'll take the severity out of how important it is to make this life change. And I was just sitting there like, how could you not be listening to this guy right now? Like what is this narrow-minded thinking about, it has to be this old way of going about, things. And so I just was like, at that moment, like, I'm not going to go down that road anymore. I'm going to forge the path, in my own kind of way. And that's why I'm just so grateful for this Naked Mind. But I mean, it really is not only a cultural shift towards normal drinking culture, like the pop cultural assumption that one must drink, but it's also then a shift from the traditional sobriety culture. It really is this new path that you're forging, but also welcoming of everyone at the same time.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, you're totally, we have research that backs up. Well, I'll put it this way. Annie's very big into research. So everything in this Naked Mind is researched. Everything we do in our programs is based on science. Like we really spend the time to look and see what the data says. And, there are a couple of studies that really inform this idea that compassion-based change is more effective and longer lasting than compulsion-based change. And I think compassion-based change, our change is where we have compassion for ourselves, where other people have compassion for us. I can't remember the exact quote from the paper, but essentially what these researchers found was auto remission, meaning quitting drinking or stopping whatever the thing is you're trying to change, happened more frequently when there weren't severe penalties. And when, I remember this phrase, when temporary deviant behavior was tolerated. So what that means is like, when people had compassion for themselves, and if they did drink, it wasn't a brutal blame fest. When they felt compassion in those moments, that highly correlated with longer and deeper change. And so for us, like, that's the key. No one, and it goes all the way to the language. I know you mentioned the term alcoholic or relapse, like we don't use any of that, mainly because it has such negative connotations for us. Ultimately, what I see in people coming into our programs, it's funny, I've been doing these regular presentations recently, and so we survey people coming in. We find that about half of the people who are joining my presentation have tried something else, and the vast majority of those people are AA. But that's still only half, and I would say like a couple of years ago, that was probably 60 or 70%. So I do see that shrinking. But the idea of creating a new culture, like a new way of looking at this, a new way of living post-alcohol is really what I think shifts the whole thing. People will ask me like, well, you've probably had it before, right? Where you tell someone you don't drink and they're like, oh, give me the story. Like, what's the, what are the gory details? And I, personally, I don't have any of those. And so ultimately what I end up saying, well, I do, that's a lie, but like, I don't have any like big, massive stories, but like what I do, tell them is I say something like, this just wasn't serving me anymore. And that's the sort of world that we want to work toward, is a place where someone says, you know what, I don't want to do this anymore. And that doesn't mean that the rest of their life is, labeled. And it doesn't mean that in order to make that transition, they have to be shamed and scolded. So that researcher definitely knows what they're talking about, because it's what we're finding too in the, real world practice of the company.
Yeah, for sure. And as you like coming up with that research and obviously like feeling and knowing how much it works really well, how do you balance it also with like a sense of like motivation and commitment? You know what I mean? Like at one point there's like, let's just not drink for a certain period of time, or like, let's really go for this. How do you balance that kind of exciting outlook of like, yeah, maybe we're going to push ourselves a little bit out the side the comfort zone, but also really marry it with that compassion?
Well, I think one of the biggest differentiators about what we talk about at this Naked Mind versus what people talk about in other programs is this. Like, we tell people that this isn't about a behavior-based goal. right? So coming into this program, it is not about whether or not you drink, right? What we do instead is we get in tune with how you feel right now, and we make an emotion-based goal. And so when we do that, what that means is it means that you could be drinking just a little bit less and feeling better, right? That's a win. So often people make the goal the action. But what we know is that a lot of people stop doing the action, but they're miserable, right? So what we really want to do is we want to set people up when they come into the program to be aiming at this emotional goal, because that means we can work toward that. There isn't, you can't half not drink, right? But you can get halfway to where you want to go emotionally. And this is one of the things I think that starts to drop the pressure around the actual behavior. Annie and I were doing an event just last week, and this was totally unplanned, although we were talking about the path, our program, the path, and we'd asked people if there were questions, and someone raised their hand, and she was on the path, and it was awesome that she came on and was telling us about it. But she said, look, I haven't quit drinking, but here's the thing. I'm drinking way less and I'm feeling so much better. And to me, that's what's important, right? Like, all right, this is progress. In all of those other programs that I tried, like there was no milestone of like, all right, you're halfway there, you're part of the way there. And that's what really, I think, shifts the conversation for us.
Yeah, for sure. And coming out on the other side too, if like you go a period of time where you don't drink, and then you might not even slip, you choose to drink again. There's
Yes.
so much shame married into that sometimes in other kind of cultures and things. But I love hearing sometimes from people who are like, you know what, I drink like once every 3 months, and it's just they have like the no weight on it. There's not a big deal.
Yes.
Like personally, I have my personal unique preferences to be alcohol free. I just don't believe in supporting the alcohol industry and just allowing my full potential to shine at all times. But like someone else can come up to their own conclusion about what role alcohol will play in their life and be happy about it, right? And I do think it would be minimized because, drinking a lot is obviously gives emotional pain for so many different reasons, but like people have autonomy to choose what that looks like.
Yeah. And I like to leave space for people to change their minds.
Yeah.
Like something that so many people talk about is, and I know this was a real bummer for me when I was quitting drinking, but this idea of like forever, like, are you frigging kidding me? Like that, at the time I was 35, right? Yeah, something like that. And I'm like, hopefully had a long time left on this earth. That seems miserable. Like, and there's nothing else that I make like a forever, well, I guess marriage, but like outside of that, there's like nothing else we could make like a forever, like I'm never doing this. And it just felt so heavy. And so that's what I like. I mean, if you were to ask Annie or me, do you guys drink? We will say I drink exactly as much as I want to, and that happens to be nothing. But you will never hear me say I'm never going to drink again. Right. And I think that's one of these things about the method is that if we really look at how we feel, then you're free to choose. Right. And that means, by the way, you're free to choose wrong. Like, if whatever, 10 years from now, you're in one of our programs and 10 years from now, you decide, yeah, you know what, it's been a while, I'm going to try it. And it doesn't work out. Okay. Now and you can get back on the path of, focusing on those emotions and recognizing, hey, this thing doesn't work for me anymore. But I found so many people come into our programs and they want to moderate, or they want us to tell them like exactly how to do it, like exactly how do I quit or exactly how do I moderate. And it's a new paradigm to be focusing on, for a lot of people to be focusing on themselves and to be focusing on their emotions. But what that does is it just opens up the possibilities for growth in all directions. Nothing's off limits, right? So if everything's okay, then that means I get to choose in this moment what direction I want to go. And that to me has always felt better than strict rules and boundaries and, the sort of boxed in feeling that I had with other methods.
Yeah, I think that choice and that autonomy is so important because as long as like you should yourself, like there's that rebellious part of your brain that's just like,
Uh-huh.
I don't want to conform to this.
Yeah.
Yeah. So leaving it up to like your own decision, and like you said, even choosing wrongly, like take the judgment away from it. Take the like, oh, it just happened away from it. Like, no, you chose that in the moment. You learn
Yeah.
from it. You can choose something different in the next moment. It's not a big deal. Like
Yes.
the world isn't over, you know?
It's a big thing. And, I will see people in our programs, say, oh, I drank last night, a lot of times it'll have a really heavy energy. And we, again, back to the terminology, we don't use the terms relapse or slip or fell off the wagon or any of that stuff. We use the term data point, right? So if you chose to drink, it's a data point. Did it work for you or not? Did you feel the way you wanted to feel? Did things go the way you wanted them to go or no? And just take that data and move on. I mean, it's so funny to me that like we put this thing on such a pedestal where like, oh, I have to never drink again. And again, this is something that's coming from traditional recovery culture that I personally don't believe is very helpful. And then in so many areas of our lives, we can make a mistake, right? Like I can, the other night, I don't mind admitting this because I had like a stressful day and the kids were making a lot of noise and I kind of snapped at them, right? But like, and I apologized and we're all good. It's fine. But like in that night, if my thought was, oh, I might have a drink, if I had a drink, that becomes this like world ending, just guilt and shame inducing horrible experience. And that's cultural, like that we've set up. And I think what we're trying to do is, I can't believe I'm about to say this. We want to make having a data point as not big of a deal as yelling at your kids. But what I mean is like, like you make mistakes. We all make mistakes. There's no reason that this one mistake has to be so catastrophic.
Yeah. And I think there's a real danger too, because like anyone usually under a year alcohol free, let's just say it's not habitual yet. It's not your normal, you know what I mean? And so
Mhm.
it's almost as if you expect someone to be like a violin virtuoso, like on the first day that they ever
Yes.
try. And if they're not perfect and they can't play all the notes, like they're a failure. And it's like we
Yes.
forget these things take practice and they take missteps all the time. So thank you so much for sharing that perspective. I
Yeah.
totally kept you way longer than I said I would today,
Totally
Scott.
fine. I'm always happy to do these. One other thing I want to say, I'm not
Yes.
going to let you kick me off yet. What I wanted to say was this idea of falling down, right? I love the idea that it's not like a switch that you flip and then like that's it. For some people, that can happen. There is something called spontaneous sobriety. It happens. It's real. But for a lot of us, it is that trial and error. And we always like to talk about this idea of a baby learning to walk. Like, so I have a 5-month-old here now. And well, she's not walking yet, but eventually she will start doing that. And like when she starts doing that, if I yell at her when she falls over, she's not going to try. But if you just let a baby learn how to do this, they're going to fall. And it's actually through the falls that they learn how to walk. And I think that idea is so central to this idea of like compassion based change and giving yourself the space to grow into this because it does take time.
Well, thank you for ending on that note there. And we'll definitely include all the links below for the This Naked Mind Certification Institute and the website. But can you just say real quick where people can find you if anyone doesn't know?
Yes, head on over to thisnakedmind.com. That's a place to find all things Annie Grace and This Naked Mind. All our social accounts are linked there too. And I will say like the vast majority of content we have is free. So if you're just dabbling in this and want to find out about us, that's a great way to get access to all types of things to learn more.
Well, thank you so much for your time today. Your super enlightening conversation. I appreciate you.
Yeah, thank you. This was really fun.